The night always had a certain glow on Payday Fridays. You could smell the starch on freshly ironed clothes, hear the soft click of heels on the kitchen floor, and feel the quiet excitement of parents getting ready to step out. Kids were buckled into the back seat, half asleep, on their way to Grandma's house. And somewhere in the neighborhood, even before the streetlights warmed up, you'd hear that unmistakable line drift through somebody's window, "Just got paid, it's Friday night." For so many families across Black America, that song wasn't just music. It was release. It was survival. It was the moment the whole house exhaled after a long week. Years ago, when I first started this channel, I tried to tell the story of the man behind that anthem, Johnny Kemp. But the video was short, rushed, back when I was still finding my way on YouTube. And a life like Johnny's, it deserves more than 5 minutes. Tonight, we're going deeper. Into the laughter of his childhood in the Bahamas. Into the bright lights of New York clubs. Into the rise and the heartbreak. And into the mystery that followed him all the way to Jamaica. But before we begin, ask yourself, how can a voice that brought us so much joy leave the world in such a haunting silence? The story begins far from the bright lights and big stages, on an island where the ocean never stops singing. In the Bahamas, where warm breezes move through the palm trees like quiet choirs, a little boy named Johnny Kemp grew up in a family big enough to fill a small church. 10 children. 10 different voices. Yet somehow, even among all that sound, Johnny's voice stood out. People said he didn't sing like a child, he sang like someone who already understood life's joys and troubles. By the time he was barely old enough to stand steady at a microphone, he was already performing in the local church. Picture it, a small wooden building, windows open, sunlight on the pews, and a boy standing on his toes, reaching for notes that felt too powerful for his tiny frame. The elders would nod at each other, the way people do when they know they're witnessing something rare. His voice wasn't trained, but it was honest. And honesty, in music, can't be taught. Before Johnny even turned 13, his talent pulled him out of the church and onto stages where children didn't usually stand. He joined the band Kinky Fox, an energetic group that mixed Caribbean rhythm with the soul of American R&B. Johnny wasn't just the young member, he was the lead singer, carrying songs across smoky clubs and open-air concerts as if he had lived 100 lives already. Crowds loved him. They didn't cheer because he was young, they cheered because he made them feel something. The Caribbean nightlife in the late 1970s and early 80s had its own magic. Tourists danced beside locals. Bands played 6 nights a week. Voices carried across warm night air. And right in the center of it was this Bahamian kid, controlling the room with confidence far beyond his years. Even then, Johnny wasn't just performing, he was studying. Every stage taught him something: how to read a crowd, how to command a groove, how to stay humble and hungry at the same time. But talent often outgrows small places, and soon Kinky Fox realized their music needed a bigger world to breathe in. So they did what so many dreamers before them had done: they packed their equipment, their hopes, and their Bahamian roots, and headed for New York City. For a young musician, New York in the early 80s was both heaven and battlefield. Neon lights, crowded clubs, endless talent, and endless competition. If you wanted to survive, you had to be exceptional. And Johnny was. The group signed with Sound of New York Records, releasing their song, So Different, in 1983. The track gathered a small audience in America, but something unexpected happened. The song took off in Canada. Suddenly, Montreal, Quebec, and Ontario became second homes for the band. They weren't just visitors, they were local favorites, a house band booked 6 nights a week. Imagine the grind, late-night shows, long winters, packed rooms, and a Bahamian voice warming up icy Canadian nights. While performing with Kinky Fox, Johnny kept stretching himself beyond the stage. He wrote songs. He sang background vocals. He worked with groups like B.B. and Q Band on their 1982 album, All Night Long, and later with Change on their album, Sharing Your Love. These weren't small collaborations, they were stepping stones. They taught him how studio music worked, how harmonies were layered, how producers built sound from silence. Johnny was becoming a full musician, not just a singer. During these years, he also crossed paths with 2 other young artists who would eventually define an era, Teddy Riley and Keith Sweat. Back then, all 3 were just teenagers with big dreams and bigger hunger. Teddy was playing with Total Climax. Keith Sweat was leading Jamila. Johnny fronted Kinky Fox. They lived in the same city, shared the same hustle, and often performed in the same circuits. There was friendly competition, each group trying to outplay the others, but also respect. None of them knew it yet, but their teenage friendships would later create one of the biggest dance anthems of the 1980s. By 1985, Johnny felt something shifting inside him. The band life had taught him discipline and resilience, but he wanted to grow. He wanted to step into the spotlight on his own terms. So he made a decision that many fear but all true artists eventually face: he went solo. And that leap brought him to Columbia Records, a major label that had just created a new department aimed at nurturing African American talent, what would eventually evolve into urban music. Senior Vice President Ruben Rodriguez believed Johnny had something special. A voice that wasn't limited to one genre. A look that could cross markets. A spirit that audiences could connect with. In 1986, he released his self-titled debut album, featuring the single, Just Another Lover. The song charted respectably, #14 on Billboard's Hot Black Singles, number 26 on the dance chart, but commercial numbers don't tell the whole story. Behind the scenes, legendary musician Kashif had executive produced the album and co-written the single. Johnny admired Kashif deeply. He was grateful, Kashif had helped him even land the deal. But inside, there was tension. Johnny felt the album didn't fully represent him. He loved R&B, but he knew he had more range: pop, rock, dance, fusion. He wanted to experiment, to show the world he wasn't meant to fit neatly into a single box. Yet as a new artist with his first big contract, he had little control. The label pushed him in one direction. He followed, hoping the next opportunity would let him stretch his wings. He didn't know it yet, but that opportunity, the one that would change everything, was already on its way. Some stories turned slowly, but Johnny Kemp's rise hit like a spark catching fire. By the time he stepped into the studio to work on his second album, Secrets of Flying, he was no longer the wide-eyed kid from the Bahamas. He had lived in 2 countries, performed in hundreds of clubs, learned the mechanics of songwriting, and survived the unpredictable world of record labels. He had the scars and the wisdom, but most importantly, he had the hunger. And then came a song that would carry his name farther than he ever imagined. Just Got Paid wasn't even meant for him at first. Rumors had floated for years. The track had originally been intended for Keith Sweat, co-written with Teddy Riley during a time when the new jack swing sound was just cracking open the door to a new era. Keith's debut album Make It Last Forever had already been turned in, so the song needed a home. And somehow, whether by timing, fate, or friendship, it found its way to Johnny. It's hard to imagine now, but there was a world where Keith Sweat might have sung those lines. Yet something about the groove, the attitude, the contagious lift of the melody seemed tailor-made for Johnny Kemp's voice. When he stepped into the booth and delivered that opening line, he didn't just sing it, he owned it. It felt like the song had been waiting for him. 1987 became the doorway to everything. When Secrets of Flying released, the single, Just Got Paid, didn't just climb the charts, it sprinted. The beat was sharp, the synths were bright, and Johnny's vocals danced over the track with both confidence and joy. New jack swing was exploding onto the scene, and this song fit perfectly into the cultural moment. People weren't just listening, they were moving. Clubs from New York to Chicago to Atlanta were packed with dancers sliding across neon-lit floors the moment the hook dropped. Roller rinks blasted it on Friday nights. Kitchen radios turned it up when paychecks hit the counter. Barbershops argued over the best line. Neighborhood block parties played it so loud the bass shook window screens. And then the numbers rolled in. Number 1 on the US R&B and dance charts. Number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. Over 1 million copies sold. A Grammy nomination for Best R&B Song at the 31st Annual Grammy Awards, 1989. Imagine Johnny, this Bahamian kid who once stood on a church crate to reach a microphone, now sitting in a room where his name appeared alongside Anita Baker, Taylor Dayne, Bobby Brown, and Luther Vandross. A seat at the table he earned through pure talent. Anita Baker won the Grammy that night, but Johnny didn't lose anything. Because by then, the world already had its verdict. Just Got Paid was a classic. This song didn't just chart, it lived. It worked its way into culture in a way few singles do. It became the soundtrack of payday for millions of working-class families, especially in Black America. It wasn't about luxury, it was about breathing room. That moment when bills were paid, dinner was on the stove, and for once, life didn't feel so heavy. When Johnny shouted, "Check the mirror, I'm looking to fly," people weren't just singing along, they were living it. In a world where joy wasn't always guaranteed, this song gave permission to celebrate the end of a long, hard week. Other singles from the album, Dancing with Myself and Birthday Suit, found their place on the charts too. They were good songs, strong songs, the kind of tracks that proved Johnny wasn't a one-note artist. But nothing eclipsed Just Got Paid. It was lightning in a bottle. And yet, even during this success, Johnny felt something deeper stirring. He believed he had more inside him than the industry allowed him to show. Columbia Records continued marketing him strictly to the black radio category. Instead of broadening his audience, the label narrowed it, placing him in a lane he never asked for. Johnny saw what artists like Tracy Chapman and Terence Trent D'Arby were allowed to do, how they crossed genres, radios, and audiences. Not because they weren't black, but because they weren't boxed in by the industry the same way. Johnny believed he had that same potential. He believed the music in him could reach more than one category on a shelf. But the machine didn't see it. They saw a hit. They didn't see an artist. And still, even with frustrations building beneath the surface, Johnny kept shining. His performances grew sharper. His presence more magnetic. Audiences didn't care about industry politics, they cared about the joy his voice brought them. And Johnny gave that joy freely, night after night, city after city. Years later, in 2000, NSYNC recorded their own version of "Just Got Paid" for their album No Strings Attached, an album that would sell 10 million copies and go diamond. A new generation danced to it. The song had crossed decades and genres. But no matter how big the remake became, there was an unspoken truth everyone seemed to agree on. Nobody could touch Johnny's version. Not then. Not now. Not ever. This was the peak, his music everywhere, his name recognized, his voice woven into the soundscape of an entire era. Johnny Kemp had stepped into the light, and for a while, the world danced with him. He didn't know the industry would soon push him away, or that the path ahead would lead to quieter rooms, smaller stages, and, eventually, a tragedy far from home. When an artist leaves the spotlight, it rarely happens all at once. For Johnny Kemp, the fade-out wasn't dramatic. It wasn't scandal. It wasn't failure. It was exhaustion, an exhaustion born not from music itself, but from the industry that wrapped itself around him. After Secrets of Flying, after the joy and the charts and the Grammy nomination, the business side of music began tightening like a vice. Johnny watched as labels, formats, and radio categories narrowed the lanes he could move in. He saw doors open for others, folk singers, crossover soul artists, experimental black musicians, while his own path seemed reinforced with invisible walls. He wanted to be more than an R&B act placed neatly on a shelf. He wanted the world to hear every shade of his sound. And so, quietly, almost gently, he stepped back. He never released another album. He never returned to the studio with Teddy Riley. Instead, he became what so many musicians become when the industry stops listening, a working artist. One who still loves the stage, but no longer orbits the fame that comes with it. Johnny poured his energy into smaller, steadier work, commercial jingles recorded in clean studios, soundtrack contributions like "Let the Walls Come Down" for the 1990 Ninja Turtles movie, performances at weddings where people cried during first dances, and private events where the microphone was close enough to touch. He sang at the wedding reception of New York Governor David Paterson in 1992, giving the room warmth without asking for applause. Music had shrunk from a spotlight into a craft. And even then, he didn't simply hold it for himself. Johnny wanted to lift others. He started his own production company, guiding younger artists through the maze he once had to navigate alone. One of the groups he supported, Imagine, had a minor hit in 1998 with "Shorty You Keep Playing With My Mind," featuring Keith Murray. Johnny wasn't chasing the charts anymore, but he was building futures, the way mentors once built his. By the early 2000s, Just Got Paid had taken on a life of its own. When NSYNC covered it in 2000 for their album No Strings Attached, which went diamond with 10 million copies sold, Johnny's name resurfaced in a new generation. Teenagers who hadn't even been born in 1988 were dancing to a rhythm he helped shape. Yet those who remembered the original knew, the version that lit up Friday nights belonged to Johnny alone. Still, the comeback people hoped for never came. He appeared occasionally, like his performance on Keith Sweat's Sweat Hotel Live DVD in 2007, but he largely lived outside the spotlight. A man content with his talent, at peace with his quieter place in music. And then, in 2015, an invitation arrived. An invitation that would become the final chapter of his story. Since 1999, legendary radio host Tom Joyner had hosted the Fantastic Voyage, a cruise designed to raise funds for students attending HBCUs, offering scholarships, resources, opportunities. The event was part celebration, part service, and always filled with stars. The 2015 lineup was stacked. Jennifer Hudson, Earth, Wind and Fire, Chubb Rock, R. Kelly, Fantasia, TLC, The Jacksons, and a tribute to the new Jack Swing era, led by Teddy Riley. It only made sense that Teddy asked Johnny to appear as a surprise guest, to perform the anthem that helped define the sound. But the first time Teddy asked, Johnny said no. Maybe he felt uncertain. Maybe age or health or distance weighed on him. Maybe he simply didn't want the spotlight again. But later, he changed his mind. He told Teddy he would come. Even though he didn't really want to travel, he would make the trip, for Teddy, for the fans, for the music they built together as kids in New York City. It was a yes wrapped in hesitation. Days before the show, Johnny flew from JFK Airport to Montego Bay, Jamaica. He checked into his hotel and texted Teddy. "I'll see you in a minute. We're going to have a lot of fun." It was the kind of message you send when you're trying to convince yourself as much as the person reading it. Later that day, he went to the cruise ship to check in. And that's where everything shifted. For reasons that remain tangled and unclear, Johnny was denied boarding. Some reports said he didn't have a permanent resident card or proper documentation. Others said a misunderstanding occurred during check-in. But whatever the cause, he never stepped onto the ship. Within hours, the story splintered into contradictions. Jamaican police later suggested Johnny had been aboard the ship at some point. The Tom Joyner Morning Show staff firmly stated he had not. The truth was lost somewhere between those accounts. What is known is this. On the morning of April 16, 2015, Johnny Kemp was found face down in the water near a beach in Montego Bay, fully clothed, with a head injury. Hotel staff called his wife, Deidre, after he failed to respond to her calls and emails. She already felt something was wrong. Police investigated. They interviewed passengers from the cruise. They looked at the scene. Their conclusion: no foul play. Probable accident. Johnny may have slipped on rocks, fallen, hit his head, and drowned. They labeled the cause of death simply, drowning. But for fans, for friends, for anyone who heard the joy in Johnny's voice, the simplicity of that explanation felt too small, too quiet for a man whose music had once lit up the world. On stage that night, Teddy Riley held back tears as he told the crowd, "Johnny Kemp was supposed to be standing right here next to me tonight. He called Johnny a star, now shining with God." You could feel the grief ripple through the room. Because even though decades had passed since Just Got Paid first hit the airwaves, the joy it created was timeless. And the man behind that joy was gone. Across the United States, especially within black communities, Just Got Paid settled into a place that numbers can't measure. It became part of a ritual, the sound of relief after a long week, the sound of families reclaiming a little joy in a world that didn't always offer it. For working-class America, the song wasn't luxury, it was survival wrapped in rhythm. Every time the beat dropped, it reminded people that they had made it through another set of challenges. The song became a cultural pulse, something deeper than radio rotation or chart positions. To many, Johnny Kemp represented an era where music carried neighborhoods, where Friday nights felt like a small celebration of endurance. And that matters, even decades later. Black America, especially those who lived through the 1980s, still talks about the song the way people talk about good memories, not perfectly, but fondly, with warmth in the voice. In the broader music world, Johnny became something more subtle yet equally valuable, a bridge. New Jack Swing already stood at the crossroads of R&B, funk, and hip-hop, but Johnny's voice helped make the sound accessible to a wider audience. His delivery was clean, joyful, and honest, and it expanded the reach of the genre beyond traditional, urban radio. Even if the industry didn't always allow him to cross formats, listeners naturally did. People who had never heard of Teddy Riley or Keith Sweat still danced to Johnny Kemp. Internationally, from Caribbean clubs to Canadian stages where Kinky Fox once held 6-night residencies, Johnny's influence lived quietly but steadily. His roots in the Bahamas and his years performing across borders made him part of a global black diaspora, a reminder of how music travels farther than the bodies that create it. After his passing, something interesting happened. Conspiracy theories faded quickly. Nostalgia did not. Fans didn't fixate on the mystery as much as they held on to the memory: Friday nights, loudspeakers, neighborhood dance floors. The emotion outlived the questions. And in many ways, that's the highest honor an artist can receive. Johnny Kemp may not have had a long list of albums, but he had something rarer. A song that became a ritual, a comfort, a generational echo. Every life leaves a trace. Some leave long discographies, walls of trophies, or decades of headlines. Johnny Kemp left something different, something quieter but far more enduring. He left a feeling. A moment. A spark that carried people from exhaustion into joy every Friday night. And for millions of listeners, that was enough to keep his name alive long after the spotlight dimmed. When we look back at his story, from a barefoot boy singing in a Bahamian church, to a teenager lighting up Caribbean clubs, to a young man conquering New York studios, it becomes clear that Johnny's life was stitched together by music at every turn. Even when the industry boxed him in, even when fame slipped away, even when the world turned its attention elsewhere, he kept doing what he was born to do: he kept singing. His final years may not have been glamorous, but they were honest. He worked. He mentored. He raised a family. He remained connected to the craft that shaped his entire identity. And even though his passing came suddenly, quietly, and far from home, his impact didn't sink with him beneath the waters of Montego Bay. Because every time Just Got Paid comes on, at a cookout, during a reunion, on a cruise deck, or in the corner of a barbershop, Johnny Kemp rises again. Not as a chart position. Not as a mystery unsolved, but as a voice that once made the world feel lighter, even if only for the length of a song. And maybe that's the real measure of an artist's legacy. Not the number of albums they leave behind, but the number of hearts they lift. So tonight, as we close this chapter, take a moment to remember him, not the tragedy, not the questions, but the joy. The joy he gave freely. The joy he earned honestly. The joy that still moves through generations who may not even know his name, but know exactly how it feels when that first beat drops. Before we end, let me ask you something. Where were you the first time you heard "Just Got Paid"? And who were you dancing with? If Johnny Kemp's story touched something in you, maybe a memory of your parents, your first job, or a Friday night long past, feel free to share it below. We read every comment. And if stories like this make you pause, reflect, or simply smile, you're welcome to stay with us. There's more to come. Until next time, keep his song, and his spirit, alive.